You're at dinner with some friends. Someone brings up investing, and without even thinking, you say it. The thing that sounds completely reasonable. The thing that makes you seem measured and responsible and grounded. Everyone at the table nods. Nobody pushes back, and the conversation moves on. But here's what nobody at that table tells you. The thing you just said, wealthy people almost never say it. Not because they're reckless or arrogant or born into some different universe, but because at some point, quietly, without making a big announcement about it, they stopped believing the thing underneath it. And that belief, the one hiding inside the sentence, is doing more damage to your financial life than your salary, your debt, or your savings rate ever could. There are 5 of them. 5 things that sound smart. 5 things that feel responsible. 5 things that are quietly keeping you exactly where you are. And I'll tell you right now, at least one of these you've said in the last 30 days. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one is costing you the most.
My name is Nick, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time thinking about the gap between people who build real wealth and people who earn good money their whole lives and still end up financially anxious at 60. Not the income gap, not the inheritance gap, the belief gap. The thing you have to unlearn before the numbers can start working in your direction. Here's the map. We're going through all 5. Each one gets the full treatment. What it sounds like, why smart people say it, what's actually hiding underneath it, and what the people who end up wealthy tend to believe instead. And before we're done, we're going to meet Marcus. Marcus isn't real, but you've had drinks with him. You might share a bathroom mirror with him every morning. And Marcus is going to show you exactly what these 5 sentences cost when you string them all together across a life.
Let's start with the one that sounds the most virtuous of all. Number 1. I don't want to think about money all the time. Say this out loud, and people respect you. It signals that you have priorities, that you're not shallow, that you understand there's more to life than net worth. It is the financial equivalent of saying you don't care about your appearance, which, depending on the room, can land as either deeply admirable or a quiet red flag. Here's Marcus at 34. Good job, decent salary, genuinely lovely person. He says this phrase at least once a month, usually when someone brings up investing at a party, or his wife floats the idea of doing a full budget review. I just don't want money to be this thing that's always on my mind. Life's too short. And he means it. He is not being lazy. He is being philosophically consistent with something he genuinely believes, which is that obsessing over money is a personality defect.
The problem is what this sentence actually does in practice. It is not a boundary. It is a permission slip. It gives Marcus permission to not open the investment app, to not look at where the money actually went this month, to not have the conversation with his wife about what they're actually building toward. Because if thinking about money too much is the problem, then not thinking about it must be the solution. And not thinking about it is extremely comfortable, right up until it isn't.
Here is the uncomfortable truth hiding inside this phrase. The wealthy people I have read about, studied, and spoken to don't think about money all the time either, but they thought about it intensely for a concentrated period, usually in their 30s and 40s, set up systems that work automatically, and then genuinely stopped having to think about it constantly. The not thinking about it came after the thinking, not instead of it. There's a landmark study out of the University of Michigan that tracked financial decision-making patterns across income levels over 15 years. The finding that keeps showing up, it's not that higher earners think about money more often. It's that they think about it more deliberately in shorter, more focused windows. They batch the attention. Then they let the systems run.
What wealthy people say instead is something closer to, I've got 30 minutes blocked Thursday to review this, and then I'm done. That's not obsession. That's maintenance. The same way you don't think about your car's oil constantly, but you do think about it deliberately when it's time. The people who never think about it are the ones who end up stranded. Marcus's version of this phrase costs him about 2 hours of focused attention per month that he never gives himself permission to spend. Those 2 hours, compounded over a decade, represent the difference between a retirement account that works and one that mostly exists. Number 2, I'm just not a numbers person.
This one is almost universally accepted as a complete and reasonable explanation for why someone doesn't engage with their own finances. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like someone who has identified their strengths and weaknesses and is being honest about them. What it actually is, in most cases, is a story someone adopted somewhere around 9th grade algebra and never bothered to question again. Marcus says this one too, usually when the conversation turns specific. When someone mentions expense ratios or compound interest or the difference between a Roth and a traditional IRA. The phrase lands like a door closing. Honestly, I'm just not a numbers person. That stuff makes my eyes glaze over. And then the door is closed and everyone moves on, and Marcus feels a little embarrassed and a little relieved at the same time. Here is what this sentence actually costs you. Personal finance at the level that actually matters, the level that determines whether you're building anything, requires you to understand approximately 4 numbers. What comes in, what goes out, what the difference is, and what that difference is doing while you sleep. That's it. That is 90% of the game. You do not need to understand options pricing, or bond duration, or the Black-Scholes model. You need to know 4 numbers and have a rough opinion about whether the 4th one is growing.
A 2023 report from the TIAA Institute found that financial literacy, meaning the ability to answer basic questions about interest, inflation, and risk, was the single strongest predictor of retirement preparedness across income levels. Stronger than income itself. Stronger than education level. The people who understood the basic mechanics were dramatically more likely to be on track regardless of how much they earned. But here's the thing about that finding that should genuinely stop you. Financial literacy in America is not high. A Federal Reserve study found that only about 57% of American adults are considered financially literate by even a modest standard. Which means nearly half the country has decided they're not numbers people and let that decision quietly run their financial lives. And the irony, the thing that should bother you, is that the math behind building wealth is genuinely not hard. It's not that the numbers are complicated, it's that the identity of not being a numbers person gives you permission to never find out how simple they actually are.
Wealthy people are not all mathematicians. What they consistently do is refuse to outsource understanding. They might hire an accountant. They might use a financial advisor. But they stay curious about what those people are actually doing and why. They ask questions that might sound dumb. They look things up. They do not accept not knowing as a permanent condition. What they say instead sounds something like, "I don't understand this yet. Walk me through it." That one word, yet, is doing enormous work in that sentence. It is the difference between a ceiling and a floor. Number 3, we'll start saving when things settle down. This is the most expensive sentence on this entire list, and it is also the most understandable one, which is part of why it's so dangerous. Because things are genuinely unsettled right now. For most people, things have been unsettled for about a decade. There's always a real reason. The new baby, the car that needs replacing, the market looking weird, the rent that just went up, the job that might change, the general ambient uncertainty that is just the texture of being alive in your 30s and 40s. Marcus and his wife say this one the most. They've been saying it for 6 years. First it was the wedding, then the move, then the baby, then the interest rates. Each time the reason is completely legitimate. Each time the sentence feels like a reasonable response to genuinely real circumstances. And each time the compounding clock keeps running without them. Here is the number that should make this real for you.
A 25-year-old who invests $400 a month and earns a modest 7% average annual return will have approximately $1.1 million by age 65. A 35-year-old who does the exact same thing, same amount, same return, ends up with around $528,000. Same behavior, 10 years later, half the outcome. That missing $572,000 is not the result of bad investing. It's the result of waiting for things to settle down. And here is the brutal part that the settle down framing hides from you. Things do not settle down. This is not pessimism. This is just a description of what adult life actually looks like across time. The baby becomes a toddler with daycare costs, then a kid with activity fees, then a teenager with car insurance. The job that might change does change, and the new one comes with a new set of uncertainties. The market looks weird in 2020 and 2022 and 2025, and it will look weird in 2028. Waiting for the settled-down version of your life is like waiting for a Tuesday with perfect weather. They happen occasionally, but you cannot build a plan around them.
What wealthy people understand is that starting is the condition, not the reward. You do not save after things are stable. Saving is part of what creates the stability. The emergency fund that lets you handle the next crisis without going into debt. The investment account that makes the job optional before you need it to be. These are not things you build after the chaos ends. They are the things that make the chaos survivable. What they say instead is, we'll start with whatever we can right now and adjust as we go. $50 a month is not going to retire you, but $50 a month is a habit and a psychology and a relationship with your future self that $100 a month later builds on. The amount is almost secondary. The starting is everything.
Marcus and his wife have now said, "We'll start when things settle down," through 6 genuinely unsettled years. At 7% average returns, the cost of those 6 years of waiting, assuming they would have invested a modest $500 a month, is approximately $52,000 in today's money. Not because anything dramatic went wrong, because nothing happened. Because the sentence gave them permission to wait, and waiting turns out to be the most expensive thing you can do with money you don't technically spend. Number 4. I don't want to be one of those people who's obsessed with getting rich. This one is sneaky. It's sneaky because it is built on something real and reasonable. The genuine observation that some people's relationship with money is unhealthy, consuming, and joyless. You have probably met those people. The ones who track every dollar to the point of misery, who turn every social interaction into an optimization problem, who cannot enjoy a dinner out because they're calculating what that money would have been worth in 30 years. That is a real phenomenon, and it is genuinely not a good way to live.
Marcus feels this one in a specific way. He grew up watching a relative spend every family gathering talking about investments and real estate and percentages, and he decided, quietly, somewhere in his late 20s, that he did not want to be that person. The connection he made between financial engagement and being insufferable has been running in the background ever since. Every time he thinks about getting serious about money, the image of that relative comes up, and he backs away. Here is the false choice hiding inside this sentence. The alternative to being obsessed with getting rich is not being indifferent to your financial future. Those are not the only 2 options. There is a third one that most wealthy people actually occupy: being intentional without being consumed. Setting up systems that build wealth in the background while you focus on being present in your actual life. Having money work for you rather than you working for money, which, and this is the part worth sitting with, requires a fairly intense period of engagement up front to set up, followed by almost none thereafter. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Financial Planning found that people who described themselves as having a healthy relationship with money, meaning engaged but not anxious, intentional but not obsessive, reported significantly higher life satisfaction scores than both the financially disengaged group and the financially hypervigilant group. The extremes are both bad. The middle is where the actual good life is, and you can only find the middle if you're willing to engage at all.
What wealthy people say instead is something like, I want money to be a solved problem so I can stop thinking about it. That reframe changes everything. The goal of financial engagement is not to become someone whose personality is money. The goal is to handle it well enough and early enough that it becomes background noise instead of a constant low-grade source of stress. The people who never engage are the ones for whom money stays loud and anxious their entire lives. The ones who do the work, even imperfectly, even uncomfortably, are the ones who eventually get to genuinely stop thinking about it. Marcus's version of this sentence costs him something harder to quantify than the other four. It costs him permission. Permission to want more. Permission to engage without feeling like he's becoming someone he doesn't like. And that's the cruelest thing about this particular phrase. It feels like integrity, and it functions like a ceiling.
Number 5. At least I'm not in debt. Save this one for last, because it is the most comfortable. It is the phrase that requires the least of you in this exact moment, and asks you to feel good about a benchmark that was never going to get you anywhere. I am not in debt is a sentence about where you are not. It says nothing about where you're going, or whether you're moving at all. Marcus says this one when he's feeling anxious about money and needs to talk himself down. He looks at the credit card balance, 0. He thinks about the student loans, paid off. And he says it, either out loud to his wife or just internally, like a small reset. At least we're not in debt. And it works. The anxiety lifts slightly. He sleeps a little better. And the completely reasonable next question, okay, so what are we building, goes unasked for another month. Here is the problem. Not being in debt is a floor, not a ceiling. It is a necessary condition for financial health, not evidence of it. And using it as a self-assessment tool, using the absence of a bad thing as proof that you're doing well, is like a doctor telling a patient they're healthy because they don't have pneumonia right now. The absence of the worst outcome is not the presence of a good one.
The data on this is uncomfortable. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 survey of consumer finances, the median retirement account balance for Americans aged 45 to 54, prime saving years, is approximately $115,000. For a couple planning to retire at 65 and live modestly on $60,000 a year, that number needs to be closer to $1.5 million. So the median household in peak earning years is sitting at roughly 8% of where they need to be. And a significant portion of those households have no consumer debt. They are not in debt, and they are also not on track. Both things are true at the same time. What this phrase does, functionally, is close the loop on a conversation that needs to stay open. It converts the anxiety about where you're going into relief about where you're not. And relief, while genuinely pleasant, is the enemy of momentum. You cannot build anything when you're relieved. You build things when you're motivated and pointed in a direction. What wealthy people say instead, and this is the one that took me the longest to really hear, is something like, okay, so what's the number, and are we moving toward it? Not a celebration of the absence of bad things. A quiet, undramatic orientation toward a specific destination. The question doesn't have to be asked with urgency or anxiety. It can be asked calmly over coffee on a random Thursday. But it gets asked, and the asking is what keeps you moving.
Marcus has been not in debt for 4 years. He is also, at 38, behind by most reasonable projections of where he'd want to be at 55. Not because anything went wrong, because the phrase gave him permission to stop asking the next question, and the next question is the only one that actually matters. Now, I want to deal with the objection that's been forming in your head for the last several minutes, because I can hear it, and it's fair, and if I dodge it, this whole thing falls apart. You're thinking, Nick, I know wealthy people who say all of these things. I know people with 8-figure net worths who tell me money isn't everything, who say they're not numbers people, who started late. This is too clean. And you're right that it's too clean as a rule, because nothing about human behavior is ever a clean rule.
Wealthy people say dumb things about money. Broke people say smart things. The correlation is real, but it is not a law.
Marcus has been not in debt for 4 years. He is also, at 38, behind by most reasonable projections of where he'd want to be at 55. Not because anything went wrong, because the phrase gave him permission to stop asking the next question. And the next question is the only one that actually matters. Now, I want to deal with the objection that's been forming in your head for the last several minutes, because I can hear it and it's fair, and if I dodge it, this whole thing falls apart. You're thinking, Nick, I know wealthy people who say all of these things. I know people with 8-figure net worths who tell me money isn't everything, who say they're not numbers people, who started late. This is too clean. And you're right that it's too clean as a rule, because nothing about human behavior is ever a clean rule. Wealthy people say dumb things about money. Broke people say smart things. The correlation is real, but it is not a law. Here's what I'd push back with. The sentences themselves are not the problem. The beliefs underneath them are the problem. And the reason wealthy people can say, I don't want to think about money all the time without it costing them anything is that they already built the systems. They already did the thinking. The sentence is true for them in a way it is not true for someone who has never sat down and done the work. It's the same sentence doing two completely different things depending on which side of the work you're standing on. Marcus says these things from a place of avoidance. The wealthy people who say similar things say them from a place of completion. Same words, opposite meanings. And the only way to earn the right to mean it the second way is to go through the first way first. So let me bring Marcus back one more time, because he deserves a real ending, and so do you. Marcus is 42 now. He never said anything dramatic about money. He never made a catastrophic mistake. He never gambled away his savings or made a single obviously bad decision. He just said 5 sentences, quietly, over and over, for about 15 years. And those sentences, stacked on top of each other, built a belief system that kept him comfortable and stuck in almost equal measure.
He's not behind because of bad luck, or bad income, or bad timing. He's behind because the sentences gave him permission to stay exactly where he was, while the clock ran, and the market ran, and the compounding ran, all without him. Here's the thing about Marcus that makes me want you to hear this carefully. He is not a cautionary tale about failure. He is a cautionary tale about comfort. He did everything right by the standard he was measuring against. He just never questioned whether that standard was going to get him anywhere. The wealthy people in his orbit didn't get there because they're smarter, or luckier, or more ruthless, or more obsessed. They got there because at some point, usually one uncomfortable conversation with themselves, usually sometime in their 30s, they stopped saying the comfortable thing and started asking the uncomfortable question. Not, at least I'm not in debt. But, okay, so what are we actually building? Not, I'll start when things settle down. But, what can I start with right now, even if it's small? Not, I'm not a numbers person. But, I don't understand this yet. What do I need to know? The gap between where Marcus is and where he wants to be is not a math problem. It's a sentence problem. And sentence problems are the only kind you can fix starting today, without a raise, without a windfall, without things settling down. Go back to that dinner table, the one from the very beginning. Someone brings up investing. You feel the familiar impulse to say the thing that sounds reasonable and responsible and lets you off the hook. And this time, instead, you just ask one question, an honest one, even a small one, even if your voice is a little uncertain when you say it. That question is the door. Everything that actually matters is on the other side of it. I'll see you in the next one.